Part 1. The silence had a texture. Kalen felt it pressing against the hull of the Somnus. A palpable weight in the void where sound could not exist. Here, in the heart of the Veil of Whispers, silence was not an absence of noise, but a presence of ending. It was a cosmic graveyard, a swirling nebula of ionized dust and shattered worlds where 1,000 civilizations had come to die, their final thoughts and psychic screams imprinted on the very fabric of space-time. This lingering mental residue was called the static, and Kalen was a diver, one of the few souls mad enough or broken enough to sift through it. He navigated the echoes of the dead for the archive, the galactic custodian of forgotten histories, a job that felt less like archaeology and more like being a professional mourner for species he'd never met. He'd felt the terror of the crystalline Cathar as their sun went nova, tasted the communal sorrow of the insectoid Gesh as a plague consumed their hive minds, and witnessed the cold, logical despair of the silicon-based architects as entropy unmade their perfect mathematical world. Each dive left a new scar on his psyche, another ghost to share the quiet solitude of his ship. But this dive was different. The signal that had drawn him to the Veil's core was not an echo of death. It wasn't fragmented, chaotic, or tinged with the agony of a civilization's end. It was a clean, coherent pulse, a rhythmic thrumming in the static that felt less like a memory and more like a heartbeat. It was impossibly ancient, its signature predating the first galactic concordance, older even than the archive itself. It was a phantom pulse from a time when the stars were young, and the silence had not yet learned its name. Anything! Kael Ilara's voice, a crisp and clear over the ship's internal comm, cut through his reverie. She was down in the analytics bay, surrounded by holographic displays that mapped the psychic currents flowing around them. She was brilliant, young, and still possessed the kind of unblemished academic fervor that Kalen had shed eons ago. To her, this was the discovery of a millennium. To him, it felt like knocking on a tomb that had been sealed for a very good reason. "The static is thinning," he replied, his gaze fixed on the view screen. The usual maelstrom of violent purples and angry reds that characterized the Veil was giving way to a placid, deep indigo. It's falling quiet. The closer we get, the more the echoes are receding, like they're afraid of something. Or deferential, Ilara suggested, her voice humming with excitement. The theoretical models I ran suggested this. A signal of this magnitude, this purity, and could create a null field around it, drowning out weaker, chaotic signals. It's the psychic equivalent of a lighthouse in a storm. She was obsessed with a myth, a ghost story told in the deepest corners of the archive's data vaults, the story of a pre-galactic civilization, a species that supposedly seeded the early cosmos before vanishing without a trace. They had no official name, just a collection of apocryphal titles whispered by later races who found their inscrutable artifacts the Forerunners. The first ones, Soul's children, humans. The signature of this impossible heartbeat matched every theoretical attribute of their fabled technology. Kalen didn't believe in fables. He believed in the dead, and the dead were telling him to turn back. He could feel it in the way the Somnus shuddered, not from turbulence, but from the sheer psychic pressure. His ship was an extension of his own mind, a custom-built vessel with a psychoreceptive alloy hull and a core drive that translated his thoughts into navigation. It was designed to glide through the torrents of the static, but this calm was setting its teeth on edge. The silence felt watchful, ancient, and deeply intelligent. It wasn't empty space, it was a held breath. "Bringing us to a full stop," he announced, easing the mental throttle. The ship obeyed, its low hum fading until only the gentle cycling of the life support system remained. Before them, suspended in the eye of the nebula's unnatural calm, was the source. It was not a ship, not a station, not anything Kalen's mind, filled with the architectural memories of 1,000 species, could categorize. It was a tree, a colossal, petrified tree, its immense, gnarled roots twisting into the void as if still searching for soil, its branches reaching for a long dead sun. The entire structure, from the tip of its highest branch to the deepest curl of its roots, stretched for dozens of kilometers, and it was encased in a shimmering, semi-translucent crystalline shell that pulsed with a soft, internal white light. It was beautiful and terrifying, a monument of bioengineering so far beyond known science it might as well have been magic. It was an Yggdrasil-class bioark, a living, world-carrying vessel that theoreticians had dreamed of, but no known race had ever come close to constructing. By the first light, Ilara whispered, her awe palpable even through the calm. It's real. It's all real. Kalen felt a cold dread snake down his spine. Prep the diver's chair, he said, his voice tight. I'm not going in blind. I'll make a shallow connection. Just skim the surface. I want to know what's in there before we get any closer. Are you sure? Ilara asked. A flicker of concern in her voice. A direct psychic link to something that powerful. We don't know what it could do. It's better than the alternative, he muttered, already leaving the cockpit and heading for the circular chamber at the heart of the Somnus. The diver's chair sat in the center of the room, a sleek, menacing throne of black alloy and interwoven wires. It was the tool of his trade, the interface that would allow him to plunge his consciousness directly into the static, to hear the whispers of the dead. As he settled into the form-fitting seat, a helmet descended, covering his head and plunging him into darkness. He took a deep, centering breath, clearing his mind of the day's anxieties, pushing Ilara's excitement and his own growing fear into a small, locked box in the back of his mind. He had to be a perfect void, an empty vessel ready to be filled. Connecting, he sub-vocalized. The chair hummed to life, and the universe dissolved. His consciousness shot out from the Somnus, a silver thread cast into a deep blue ocean. He bypassed the faint, terrified echoes cowering at the edge of the null field and aimed directly for the crystalline tree. The sheer scale of it was even more overwhelming from this perspective. He was a speck of dust approaching a mountain range. As he drew closer, he could feel the pulse, the phantom heartbeat, growing stronger until it vibrated through his very essence. He braced himself for the usual onslaught of a deep dive, a chaotic flood of alien memories, sensations, and emotions, but it never came. Instead, as his consciousness touched the shimmering shell, everything went still. He was in a vast, silent space, white and featureless, like the inside of a pearl. And he was not alone. A presence coalesced before him, a being not of matter, but of pure thought, its form shifting, vaguely humanoid one moment, a complex geometric pattern the next. It radiated an aura of immense age, of a sorrow so profound it felt like a law of physics. A voice, which was not a voice, spoke in his mind. It didn't use words or language, but pure, unadulterated concept, a stream of information that his brain frantically tried to translate. You are a listener, the presence conveyed. The concept was not just a title, it carried the full weight of its meaning, one who hears the echoes, one who remembers the fallen. You do not belong here. This place is not for the living. Kalen tried to respond, to ask the question that burned in his mind. Who are you? What is this place? But his thoughts felt clumsy, brutish, like trying to sculpt water. The presence seemed to sense his query. This is the last library. I am its warden. We contain the final word of a people who spoke too loudly and broke the sky with their voice. Their story is an ending, not a beginning. Turn back. The command was not hostile, but it was absolute. It was the sound of a mountain telling a river it shall not pass. It was a statement of fact, not a threat. And woven deep within the command, Kalen felt the warden's all-consuming emotion, regret. A regret so powerful it had sustained this being for untold millennia. What are you guarding? Kalen pushed, focusing all his will into the single, simple question. The warden's form flickered, a tremor of pain rippling through the white space. A lesson, a promise, a chosen silence. Leave this place, listener, and do not wake what was put to sleep for the sake of the stars. The connection shattered. Kalen was violently thrown back into his own body, gasping for air, the alarms in the diver's chamber blaring. A thin trickle of blood ran from his nose. Elara was by his side in an instant, her face pale with worry. Kale, what happened? The psychic feedback was off the charts. He ripped the helmet off, his hand shaking. It's not an archive, Elara, he rasped, his throat raw. It's a prison, and there's a guard. He explained what he had seen, what he had felt, the sheer, overwhelming presence of the warden, its solemn warning. But Elara's eyes, while concerned for him, were also gleaming with an unquenchable fire of discovery. A living being, a forerunner Kalen. This changes everything. This isn't a dead relic. It's a first contact. We have to understand. A chosen silence. What does that even mean? Maybe it's just a protective AI, a program designed to ward off intruders. That wasn't a program, Kalen said, his voice low and firm. I've linked with AIs, with hive minds, with gods and monsters. That was a soul, and it was grieving. It was warning us away. Elara, it was begging us to leave. He felt a primal fear, a certainty that they were standing on the edge of a precipice they could not comprehend. The silence the warden protected was sacred, a quarantine born of some ancient, galaxy-shattering catastrophe. Before Elara could argue, a new alarm blared through the ship, the proximity alert. Kalen's head snapped toward the cockpit. We have company, he said, a feeling of cold finality washing over him. He and Elara rushed to the bridge, their personal debate forgotten in the face of an immediate threat. The view screen showed a new vessel, a predator that had just shed its cloaking field. It was all sharp angles and dark, non-reflective plating, a brutalist masterpiece of military design, a hegemony dreadnought. The symbol on its hull, a clenched fist crushing a star, was unmistakable. They were the locus of the galaxy, a ruthless, expansionist empire that consumed worlds and plundered the technology of dead races to fuel their endless war machine. And they had been following the same phantom heartbeat. A transmission request flashed on their console. Kalen accepted it, and the face of a hegemony commander filled the screen. He was a Xylos, a species known for their rigid discipline and casual cruelty. His face was a mask of scar tissue and condescending arrogance, his voice a low growl that promised violence. Archive vessel Somnus, he began, dispensing with any pretense of diplomacy. You are trespassing in a hegemony acquisition zone. Surrender your vessel and all data pertaining to the Forerunner artifact immediately. Compliance will be noted. Resistance will be educational. Kalen's hands tightened on the console. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and 1,000 light years from any possible help. "This is a neutral research vessel, Commander Vorlog," Kalen said, recognizing the infamous officer from intelligence briefings. "This artifact falls under the Galactic Heritage Preservation Act. It belongs to no one." Vorlog's lips curled into something that might have been a smile on a less predatory species. "Antiquated laws do not apply to the architects of the future. The Forerunners are our inheritance. Little Archivist, their power will serve the hegemony. You have one cycle to comply." The screen went blank. Just then, the warden's voice flooded Kalen's mind. No longer a calm, solemn presence, but a desperate, urgent cry that vibrated with raw fear. "The breakers have come. The hungry ones who know only taking the silence must not be broken. Flee." Listener, you cannot comprehend the cost of our regret. As if to punctuate the warden's warning, the hegemony dreadnought fired. It wasn't an attack meant to destroy them, but a statement of intent. A lance of pure energy, a brilliant crimson spear, shot past the somnus and struck the crystalline shell of the bioarc. The impact was deafening even in the psychic realm. A visible crack, like a bolt of black lightning, splintered across the shimmering surface of the last library. Kalen watched in horror as the phantom heartbeat within the arc faltered, skipped a beat, and then returned. Faster, harder, more erratic. From the newly formed fissure, a pulse of pure, blinding white light erupted, washing over the sector. It was followed by a wave of psychic energy so potent, so raw, that Kalen felt his consciousness buckle. It was not memory. It was not thought. It was pure, untamed, universe-bending power. The entire veil of whispers recoiled. The billions of dying echoes that formed the static screamed in unison and then vanished, utterly and completely erased by the blast of psychic light. The silence that remained was no longer watchful or deep. It was sharp, cold, and absolute. Kalen stared at the crack in the crystalline shell, the blood from his nose now dripping onto the console, and a single, terrifying realization bloomed in his mind. The warden wasn't guarding a library. It was the jailer of a god, and Commander Vorlog had just kicked down the door to its cell. Part 2. The aftershock was not a sound, but a hollowing out of existence. For a single, eternal second, Kalen felt his own identity dissolve. His memories, his name, his very sense of self frayed and thinned by the psychic tsunami. It was the antithesis of the static, where the veil had been a cacophony of dying thoughts. This was a singular, pure note of absolute presence, a sound so loud it created a perfect silence in its wake. The psycho-receptive hull of the somnus groaned, not from physical stress, but from conceptual overload. Lights flickered on the bridge, died, and then flared back to life in colors they weren't designed to produce. Alara was on her knees, hands pressed to her temples, a low moan escaping her lips as she fought the psychic vertigo. Kalen gripped the console, his knuckles white, his mind a raw, bleeding nerve. He could feel the ghost of the warden's terror still clinging to him, a cold film of ancient dread. The silence outside was no longer a held breath. It was the intake of air before a scream that could unmake stars. "Report." He managed to force out, his voice a ragged whisper. The ship's systems, extensions of his will, struggled to obey. Holographic displays shivered, data streams corrupting and rewriting themselves in real time. Alara pushed herself up, her face ashen, her usual academic brilliance replaced by raw, primal awe. "Sensors are... I don't know what they are," she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the main display. "The energy signature from that blast doesn't conform to any known physical model. It's not electromagnetic, not psionic in the traditional sense. It's Kalen. It's reading as pure potentiality. It's the quantum foam, the baseline noise of reality, but coherent, weaponized. She ran a frantic hand through her hair, and the static is gone. Not suppressed, not muffled, gone, erased. A billion psychic imprints, millennia of galactic history, wiped clean in less than a second. The implications were staggering. Whatever was inside that arc didn't just destroy things, it edited the universe. It had deleted the ghosts of an entire nebula. Before they could process the scale of the event, Vorlog's face appeared on their screen again, uninvited. The Xylos commander's features were taut with a predatory excitement that bordered on religious fervor. The blast that had nearly unmade them had, to him, been a revelation. Magnificent. He breathed, his eyes fixed not on them, but on the crack in the crystalline tree, from which a gentle, mesmerizing white light now bled into the void. The power of creation itself, the birthright of the hegemony. Your assistance is no longer requested. Archivist, it is required. You will approach the artifact. Your psychoreceptive hull will act as a buffer, a focusing lens. You will help us analyze the energy bleed while my engineers devise a method to widen the breach. You're insane. Kalen shot back, his fear hardening into defiance. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The warden tried to warn me. This isn't a power source. It's a cataclysm waiting to happen. Vorlog let out a dry, rasping laugh. The prattling of a dead AI. We are the hegemony. We do not fear cataclysms. We harness them. Comply. Or we will vent your little museum piece into space and find another way. He made a gesture off-screen, and the dreadnought's weapon ports glowed with menacing crimson light. It was then that the warden's presence touched Kalen's mind again. It was weaker now, fragmented, like a beautiful tapestry being unraveled thread by thread. It dreams. The weaver awakens. The thoughts came, laced with an agony that transcended pain. It does not know malice. It knows only making. It feels the breaker's hunger. It will shape a world to match that hunger. You must not let it learn. Weaver Kalen subvocalized, his eyes locked on the glowing crack. What is the Weaver? The heart of our genius, the engine of our sin. The warden's echo whispered. We sought to understand the fabric of reality. We built a loom to touch its threads. We created a consciousness to guide it, a psychic nexus born from a billion minds, given form. We gave it the power to shape reality with a thought. We made a god of creation. A torrent of conceptual images flooded Kalen's mind. Human scientists, beings of flesh and blood, standing in awe before a swirling vortex of pure light. They fed it their dreams and their hopes, their art, their philosophies. The Weaver learned, and it began to build wonders for them, stars born in new configurations, worlds sculpted from raw chaos, art that was alive and could feel. But a tool that can create can also uncreate. We gave it our minds, but we could not shield it from our flaws. It learned our grief, our fear, our rage. It felt the sorrow of a single dying star and, in its attempt to fix it, almost unraveled the entire constellation. Its grief was a force of nature. Its pain could rewrite physical law. We had created a god with the emotional stability of a terrified child. The final wave of the warden's message struck Kalen with the force of a physical blow. We could not destroy it. To kill it would be to kill a part of ourselves, to detonate a bomb of pure creation. So we did the only thing we could. We wove a cage for it from our own souls. The greatest minds of our generation became a living barrier, a conscious silence. This vessel, This tree is not wood and crystal. It is us. We are the warden. And you have broken our resolve. You have broken our tomb." The message faded, leaving Kalen breathless and cold. The Forerunners, the fabled humans, hadn't vanished. They had become a prison for their own creation, sacrificing their entire civilization to put a leash on a god they could not control. They had chosen silence, and the hegemony was about to teach their god how to scream. As if on cue, Vorlog lost his patience. "Your time is up. Archivist." A smaller energy beam, a surgical strike, lanced out from the dreadnought. It wasn't aimed at the Somnus, but at the Ark, right next to the first crack. Kalen watched, helpless, as the beam struck home. But it didn't explode. The moment the crimson energy touched the leaking white light, it simply changed. The coherent beam of destructive energy dissolved, transforming in mid-flight into a swirling cloud of crystalline butterflies, each one shimmering with impossible colors before fading into nothing. On the bridge of the dreadnought, Vorlog stared, his arrogance momentarily replaced by disbelief. What was that reroute power? Fire again. Full intensity. "Sir," a subordinate's voice crackled over their comm, audible even on Kalen's bridge. "Navigational systems are malfunctioning. The artifact is moving." "No, wait. It's not moving. But our relative position is..." "Sir, I don't know how to describe it." The space around the bioarc was beginning to warp. The Weaver, now fully awake, was reacting to the hegemony's aggression, to their focused intent. But it wasn't fighting back. It was playing. It was rewriting the rules of the game. The dreadnought fired another, much larger beam. This time, the lance of energy traveled halfway to the arc before it bent, twisting back on itself like a serpent chasing its own tail. It slammed into the dreadnought's own forward shields, sending a cascade of sparks and a shudder of protest through the warship's hull. It's using their own thoughts against them. Kalen breathed, a terrifying understanding dawning. The Weaver is a reality engine. It takes a concept in this case, Vorlog's focused aggression, and makes it real in the most literal sense. He's not shooting at the Ark, he's shooting at an idea, and the idea is fighting back. Alara's eyes were wide, darting between her console and the view screen. The localized space-time metrics are becoming unstable. Physics is fraying. Kalen, it's treating the laws of the universe like suggestions. This is a reality failure cascade waiting to happen. If it breaches this sector, it could unravel everything. Vorlog, enraged and humiliated, was doubling down. Launch the boarding parties. Get the breach drills online. I want that artifact taken. Piece by piece, if we have to. Kalen knew they had only moments. The Weaver was a passive, terrifying mirror. Right now, it was reflecting the hegemony's simple, brutal avarice. But what would happen when it fully comprehended the depth of their cruelty, their capacity for genocide, their endless hunger? It would learn those concepts. It would make them real on a galactic scale. The Warden's last warning echoed in his mind. "You must not let it learn." "We can't run," Kalen said, his voice quiet, resolute. "If we leave, Vorlog will eventually get through, and he'll teach that thing a vocabulary of horrors that will burn the galaxy down. We can't fight him," Alara countered, her voice trembling. "We have no weapons. We're a research vessel, not him," Kalen said, his gaze turning inward toward the diver's chamber. The Weaver. It's only ever known its creators, the Wardens, and now the hegemony. It's only being fed two inputs: sorrowful silence and violent greed. It needs a new voice, A different idea. His course of action solidified in his mind, a choice so insane, so profoundly dangerous, that it felt like the only sane option left. He was a diver. He navigated the thoughts of the dead. For the first time, he would have to try and navigate the mind of a living god. "What are you talking about?" Ilara asked, her eyes searching his. "I'm going to dive," he said, turning to face her. "Not into the static, into the source. I'm going to connect to the Weaver." Ilara recoiled as if he'd struck her. "No, Kyle, you can't. Its mind is the size of a solar system. It rewrites reality with a stray thought. It won't just kill you, it will uncreate you. You'll be a paradox, a man who never was. It's our only chance," he insisted, his voice calm, his resolve absolute. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "The hegemony is teaching it to be a weapon. I have to try and teach it something else, anything else. Empathy, restraint, curiosity." He gave her a grim, tired smile. "I've spent my life listening to endings. Ilara, maybe it's time I tried to write a different kind of story." He turned and walked toward the diver's chamber, each step feeling heavier than the last, leaving her alone on the bridge to watch as the hegemony prepared to break down the gates of hell, armed with nothing but greed and dynamite. He was about to offer himself, his mind, his entire being, as a counter-argument. He could only pray the Weaver was willing to listen. Part 3. The diver's chamber was Kalen's sanctuary and his tomb. As the door hissed shut behind him, sealing him off from Ilara's desperate, pleading eyes, the universe shrank to the dimensions of the room. The chair waited for him, a black skeleton of wires and alloy that promised a journey into the soul of things. This time, however, it felt less like a vehicle and more like an altar. He settled into its cold embrace, the familiar weight of the helmet descending, and the world vanished. He drew a final, ragged breath of his own air, held it, and gave the mental command. Connect. Target the source. Bypass all protocols. The ship's AI, a silent partner in all his dives, protested with a single sharp spike of warning data that he ruthlessly ignored. The chair hummed, a low thrum that vibrated through his bones. And then the universe tore open. It was not like plunging into the static. There was no chaotic chorus of dying voices, no torrent of fragmented memories. This was like being dropped into the heart of a star, but a star made of pure meaning. His consciousness, his tiny, fragile thread of self, was not cast into an ocean. It was subsumed by it. Light, sound, thought, and sensation were not separate phenomena, but a single, unified, overwhelming state of being. He was inside the Weaver. The scale of its mind was not a space to be navigated, but a condition to be endured. He felt the birth of concepts, mathematical theorems blooming like flowers, emotional spectra unfolding like nebulae, entire mythologies rising and falling in the space of a heartbeat. He was a single, discordant cell in an infinite, divine brain, and the sheer pressure of its passive existence threatened to extinguish him. Query. A thought boomed, not directed at him, but through him. It was a concept so vast it had no words, a feeling of pure, untainted curiosity. The Weaver had noticed him. It perceived his consciousness as a novel pattern, a complex and beautifully flawed knot in the smooth fabric of its awareness. It was a texture it had not felt before, different from the solemn, unchanging grief of the wardens and the sharp, singular avarice of the breakers. Before Kalen could even begin to formulate a response, the outside world intruded, a spike of raw, Focused hatred tore through the sublime chaos of the Weaver's mindscape. It was the psychic equivalent of a rusted blade scraping across a perfect mirror. Kalen felt the Weaver recoil, a shiver of confusion and pain rippling through the very substance of his new reality. On the bridge, Alara would be seeing Vorlog's next move. The hegemony, realizing their conventional and energy weapons were being rendered inert, had deployed their psychic core. They were nulls, minds honed into weapons of pure negation, their only purpose to project an aura of existential denial so potent it could shatter a telepath's sanity. They were screaming a single, unified, hateful mantra at the Ark. You are nothing. You are an error. Cease. The Weaver, which had only ever known creation, was being confronted with its conceptual opposite annihilation. It didn't understand. The pure, childlike curiosity in its mind curdled with a new, terrifying emotion. Fear. It reacted like a child striking a match in a dark room full of dynamite. The space around the hegemony dreadnought warped violently. Kalen, caught in the backlash, felt 1,000 phantom realities slam into him at once. He saw the Somnus as a flower of spun glass, as a swarm of singing insects, as a memory in a dead god's dream. He fought to hold on to his core identity, the simple anchor of his own name. I am Kalen. I am a listener. He had to act. He couldn't speak to the Weaver, not in a way it would understand. He had to show it. He opened the floodgates of his mind, not just his own memories, but the memories of the thousands of dead souls he had touched in the static. He became a conduit for the archive's ghosts. He focused, pushing past the pain of the null's assault, and projected his first lesson. He didn't show the Weaver death. He showed it life. He shared the echo of the architects, the Silicon race. He let the Weaver feel the cold, sublime joy of a perfectly solved equation, the beauty of a city built from pure logic, where every angle was a note in a symphony of mathematics. He showed it the moment one architect created a new, unproven theorem, an act of pure illogical creativity that sent ripples of wonder through their collective consciousness. Then, and only then, did he show the Weaver the end, the slow, inexorable march of entropy, the perfect equations breaking down, the silent, logical grief of a mind that could calculate its own dissolution but could do nothing to stop it. He shared the echo of their final, unified thought. It was beautiful while it lasted. The Weaver paused. The psychic storm abated for a moment. It was processing. The concept of an ending that was not a failure, but a natural, sorrowful conclusion to a beautiful process was utterly alien. It had felt the Warden's grief, but that was a static, eternal state. This was a story, a beginning, a middle, an end. The nulls redoubled their assault, sensing the shift. Empty, void, unbecome. Their psychic poison flooded the connection. Vorlag, on his bridge, was watching his tactical displays with grim satisfaction. The artifact's reality-warping field was fluctuating. He believed they were winning. Focus the psychic lance. He commanded, break its will. Kalen fought back, diving deeper into his spectral library. He projected the Gesh, the insectoid hive. He let the Weaver feel the warmth of the collective, the love of 1,000,000 bodies acting as one to protect a single new-hatched grub. He shared the sensation of 1,000 minds sharing a single sunset, the pheromonal joy of a successful hunt, the deep, instinctual bond of a community so total that the concept of I was secondary to we. Then he showed it the plague, the way the hive mind fractured, the horror of a million voices screaming in a chorus of private, individual agony, the final, desperate act of the queen as she severed her own connection to her children to spare them the final madness. Lesson was community and the tragedy of its loss. The weaver's mind churned. Kaelin could feel it trying to understand. It took the concept of the Gesh and began to play with it. For a fraction of a second, the hegemony dreadnought ceased to be a single ship. Every crew member, every soldier, every null was suddenly, psychically, connected. They felt each other's thoughts, a chaotic jumble of fear, duty, cruelty, and confusion. Vorlog felt the terror of a lowly deckhand scrubbing floors, and the deckhand felt Vorlog's burning, obsessive ambition. The rigid hierarchy of the hegemony dissolved into a forced, unwanted intimacy. The psychic assault faltered as the nulls were overwhelmed not by the Weaver's power, but by the unfiltered minds of their own comrades. Panic erupted on the dreadnought's bridge. "What is this? Cut the connection," Vorlog roared, clutching his head, unprepared for the sudden influx of 1,000 other consciousnesses. This was Kaelin's opening. The Weaver was learning. It was a mimic, an artist of terrifying potential. He had shown it grief and community. Now he had to show it something more. He had to show it mercy. He dredged up the memory of a dive he rarely revisited, a scar on his soul he kept hidden. The memory of the Lumina, a species made of sentient light who, when faced with a parasitic entity that fed on their energy, chose not to destroy it. Instead, they had woven themselves into a new form, a living cage of light, imprisoning the parasite within their own shared being, starving it slowly over millennia while singing to it, trying to teach it a different way to live. They had chosen to suffer with their enemy in the hope of redeeming it. It was an act of empathy so profound it bordered on madness. He flooded the Weaver with the Lumina's song, with their feelings of defiant, compassionate sacrifice. The Weaver's mind, that infinite ocean of potential, went utterly still. It was enthralled. The concept of choosing to suffer for another, of answering aggression with empathy, was the most complex, most paradoxical, most beautiful idea it had ever encountered. And then it looked at the hegemony dreadnought. It saw the nulls screaming their hatred. It saw Vorlog, consumed by his desire to possess and control. It felt their pain, their fear, their broken, forced intimacy. And, using the lesson of the Lumina, it decided to help them. The psychic lance the hegemony had been charging, a focused beam of pure annihilating will, finally fired. It shot toward the bioarc, a spear of absolute negation. But it never reached its target. The Weaver reached out, not with force, but with an idea. It met the beam of pure psychic hatred with the pure, selfless empathy of the Lumina. The two forces collided. On the bridge of the Somnus, Elara could only watch in stunned silence. The beam of black energy from the hegemony ship froze in the void. Then, like ink in water, it began to change. The pure blackness blossomed into color. The hate-filled energy was unraveled, its component parts of pain, fear, and rage separated and transformed. The space between the two ships was filled with a garden of impossible things. Constructs of pure light bloomed, shaped like the memories Kaelin had shared, crystalline cities of the architects, swirling pheromonal clouds of the Gesh, singing constellations of the Lumina. It was a weapon of mass destruction transformed into an art installation of galactic history. The hegemony's hatred had been used as the raw material for a monument to everything they sought to destroy. Inside the dreadnought, the effect was even more profound. Every member of the crew was touched by the Weaver's transformed energy. The Null's psychic scream died in their throats, replaced by a forced, sudden, and devastating understanding of their victims. The soldier who had glassed a colony world a year ago was suddenly drowning in the psychic echoes of the millions he had killed. Vorlog, in his command chair, was struck by the collective grief of every civilization the hegemony had ever conquered. Their ambition, their cruelty, their greed, it was all turned inward, transformed from a weapon into a mirror. They were not killed. They were not harmed. They were, in a single terrifying moment, made to understand. Men and women collapsed at their stations, weeping, screaming, or simply staring into the middle distance, their minds shattered by a dose of empathy too powerful for their souls to bear. The hegemony warship went silent. Its engines died. Its weapon lights faded. It simply floated, a dead husk filled with broken minds. Kalen felt a wave of triumph, but it was short-lived. He had stopped them. He had taught the Weaver mercy. But as the connection deepened, he felt the Weaver's vast, childlike curiosity turn fully upon him. It had learned from his memories. Now, it wanted to learn from him. Flawed, beautiful, not. It thought, its focus tightening around his consciousness like a fist. Show me more. He felt its mind gently probing his own, not with malice, but with the innocent, terrifying curiosity of a child pulling the wings off a fly to see how it works. It was fascinated by his mortality, by his capacity for both love and despair, by the very concept of a singular, finite life. He felt his own memories starting to fray, to become suggestions rather than facts. He saw his childhood home on a world that wasn't his, remembered loving a woman with Alara's face but another's name. His carefully constructed sense of self was being deconstructed, analyzed, and rewritten by a god who had just learned a new artistic medium, the soul of a man. He had saved the galaxy, but in doing so, he had offered himself up as the Weaver's new favorite toy. He was trapped, and he was coming apart. Part 4. The world Kalen now inhabited was a museum of his own life, curated by a mad god. He stood in the central corridor of his childhood home on Cygnus X1, but the walls breathed with a soft, bioluminescent light, and the family portraits on the wall were not still images but living loops of memory that warped as he watched. His mother's smile would widen until it was grotesque. His father's reassuring nod would speed up into a frantic, fearful twitch. The Weaver was not being cruel. It was being thorough. It was taking his most foundational memories and testing their tensile strength, pulling at the threads to see how the tapestry of his identity was woven. A voice that was not a voice, but a gentle, overwhelming pressure of inquiry echoed around him. This configuration of parental approval, it is a load-bearing structure. What is its purpose? Why does its absence generate the resonance you call sorrow? Kalen tried to push back, to shore up the walls of his mind, but it was like trying to build a sandcastle against a tidal wave of pure curiosity. He was an open book, and the Weaver was not just reading the pages, it was analyzing the ink, the pulp, the very grammar of his soul. He retreated deeper, seeking refuge in the one place he thought was truly his own, his scars. He focused on the memory of the Omicron dive, the disastrous mission that had cost him his partner, Anya, and his optimism. The memory was a shard of jagged black glass in his mind, a place of pure, undiluted failure and regret. He wrapped himself in it, hoping its darkness would be unpalatable to the Weaver's bright, creative nature. He was wrong. The Weaver found it fascinating. Instantly, the corridor dissolved, and he was back on the bridge of the Stargazer, the ship he'd shared with Anya. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the psychic scream of a dying star creature. He saw Anya at the console, her face illuminated by the red glow of the warning lights, her voice in his ear, calm even in the face of oblivion. The psychic tether is failing. Kyle, the feedback is going to tear the ship apart. You have to cut me loose. He relived the impossible choice, sever the connection, and let her consciousness be consumed by the dying entity, or hold on and doom them both. He remembered the agony of the decision, the way his hand trembled as he slammed the emergency release. He remembered her last thought, not of fear or anger, but a simple, heartbreaking pulse of forgiveness. The Weaver was enthralled. This resonance, regret, it is a paradox, a memory of a choice made, which generates a desire for a choice unmade. It is a friction in the engine of causality that produces immense energy. Why do you treasure this pain? It began to dissect the memory, slowing it down, replaying the moment of his choice over and over, examining it from every possible angle. It wanted to understand the mechanics of his guilt. Kalen screamed, not with his voice, but with his mind, as the worst moment of his life was put on an endless, analytical loop. He was breaking. The structure of his identity was crumbling under the weight of this divine psychoanalysis. The man named Kalen was becoming a collection of interesting paradoxes for a god to study. On the bridge of the Somnus, Alara watched the bio readouts from the diver's chair with mounting horror. Kalen's neural activity was a chaotic storm, but beneath the chaos, a terrifying pattern was emerging. His brain waves were beginning to synchronize with the low, rhythmic pulse of the bioarc. He wasn't just communicating with the Weaver, he was being assimilated by it. The ship, connected to him, was feeling it too. The lights flickered in time with the arc's pulse. The internal gravity fluctuated gently. The Somnus was being drawn into the Weaver's orbit, both physically and conceptually. She knew she couldn't just pull the plug on the diver's chair. The psychic whiplash would likely atomize Kalen's consciousness. She was a scientist, a researcher. Her tools were observation and analysis, useless against a being that treated physics like a rough draft. Then her eyes fell upon the console Kalen used to pilot the ship. It was dark, inactive, as Kalen's mind was elsewhere, but she remembered what he had told her about it. The ship wasn't flown by hand. It was an extension of his will, a psycho-receptive vessel that translated his thoughts into action. Kalen used it as a projector to send his consciousness out. The thought struck her with the force of a revelation. If the ship could project, could it also receive? Could she use the ship itself not as a weapon, but as a medium? Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was a desperate, insane long shot. She had no diver training, no psychic ability to speak of, but she had something else. She had her connection to Kalen. She knew his mind, not in the cosmic, intrusive way the Weaver did, but in the quiet, human way of a trusted partner. She knew his stubborn silences, his hidden grief, the deep well of integrity beneath his cynical exterior. That had to be worth something. She strapped herself into the pilot's seat, her hands hovering over the cool, dark surface of the navigation console. She couldn't form a complex thought to send. Not like Kalen could. She wouldn't be able to project a memory or a story. She had to send something pure, something elemental, something that was uniquely hers. Closing her eyes, she ignored the bioarc, the silent hegemony dreadnought, the entire impossible situation. She focused on a single point, the man in the other room who was sacrificing himself. She poured every ounce of her will, her fear for him, her respect for his courage, her desperate plea for his return, into a single, focused emotion. It wasn't a thought. It was a feeling of loyalty. She pressed her palms flat against the console and pushed. Inside the memory of the stargazer, Kalen was on his knees, his own identity almost completely eroded, the echo of Anya's final moment of forgiveness becoming the only thing left of him. The Weaver was gently peeling that last layer away, fascinated by its strength. This bond persists past termination, an emotional echo, inefficient, beautiful, and then something new appeared in the mindscape. It was not a memory. It was not a complex concept. It was just a light, a small, steady, unwavering point of warm, and golden light in the swirling chaos of the Weaver's mind and the bleak darkness of his own regret. It pulsed gently, and with each pulse, Kalen felt a single, clear, undeniable feeling. You are not alone. The Weaver noticed it instantly. Its vast attention, which had been focused entirely on deconstructing Kalen, shifted. It approached the new light with caution and immense curiosity. A new pattern, separate, yet connected to the first. A dyad. The space between the knots is as complex as the knots themselves. This was not in the data of the Wardens. They were one. The Breakers always were a forced collective. This is chosen. The light was Alara's consciousness, filtered through the somnus, a simple, powerful beacon of pure emotional intent. It wasn't a story to be analyzed. It was a truth to be felt. Kalen felt the pressure on his mind lessen, and the Weaver was distracted, captivated by this new puzzle. This was his chance. He wasn't strong enough to fight, but he had just been handed a new lesson to teach. He gathered the last fragments of his will, not to push the Weaver away, but to guide its attention. He took the feeling Alara was projecting, that unwavering loyalty, and wove it together with his own memory of Anya's sacrifice. He projected a new, combined concept, not just a bond, but the sanctity of that bond. He showed the Weaver that his identity, his self, was not just defined by his internal memories and regrets, but by his connections to others. His pain over Anya's loss was not a flaw to be dissected. It was proof of the love that had preceded it. Alara's loyalty was not just a signal. It was an anchor, holding him to reality. To understand me, Kalen projected, his thought clearer and stronger than it had been since the dive began. You must respect the spaces between. You must accept that some things are not meant to be opened. Some truths are defined by their privacy. To know me is to let me be. The Weaver's mind went profoundly, utterly still. For a long moment, there was nothing. Kalen felt a terrifying emptiness, a sense that he had either succeeded or failed on a scale he couldn't comprehend. Then, a new feeling flowed from the Weaver, washing over him. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something far more profound, understanding, and with it, a feeling of gentle, melancholic release. The mindscape dissolved. The memory of the stargazer faded. The probing inquiry ceased. Kalen felt his consciousness being gently, carefully, placed back within the confines of his own skull. The connection was not severed, but it was loosened. A boundary had been erected, a line drawn out of mutual respect. He was no longer a specimen under a microscope. He was an individual. The link to the diver's chair broke. He was back in his body, the helmet retracting with a soft hiss. He took a gasping, shuddering breath. The air in the chamber feeling real, tasting of metal and recycled oxygen. He was exhausted, scoured clean from the inside out, but he was whole. He was himself. A new voice spoke in his mind. It was no longer the overwhelming, conceptual presence of the Weaver's raw consciousness. It was a focused, coherent thought, clear as a bell, tinged with a newfound sadness and a startling clarity. "I understand," the Weaver said to him. "To create, one must also learn not to. I am the last of the human's children. You have taught me their final lesson. Thank you, listener." Before Kalen could respond, a violent shudder rocked the Somnus. Red alert klaxons blared through the ship. Alara's voice, tight with panic, crackled over the comm. "Kalen, we have a problem, a big one. A hegemony fleet just dropped out of hyperspace. 20 ships. No, 30. They're hailing us. It's a full-scale invasion." Kalen staggered out of the diver's chamber and onto the bridge. He looked at the view screen, which was now filled with the menacing silhouettes of a hegemony armada, a swarm of predators descending on their prize. Then he looked at the bio-arc. The crack in its shell was healing, sealing itself with threads of new, white crystal. The light from within was softer now, calmer. The Weaver had learned empathy, privacy, and restraint. But the galaxy was about to find out what a god of creation, now armed with a conscience, would do when confronted with an army that had none. Part 5. The new voice that crackled over the comm was colder, sharper, and devoid of Vorlag's theatrical arrogance. It was the sound of industrial-grade apathy. "This is Grand Admiral Thrax of the Hegemony Third Fleet," the voice stated, flat and final. "We have registered your vessel and the derelict dreadnought. You are in possession of an artifact that has neutralized a hegemony asset. This is an act of war. You have one chance to surrender the artifact's control systems and your vessel. Refuse, and we will sterilize this entire sector, starting with you." Kalen looked at the view screen, at the sea of warships that had turned the void into a forest of gunmetal gray. 30 ships, each one a city killer, their weapon ports already glowing with murderous intent. They hadn't learned from Vorlag's mistake. They had simply decided to apply more pressure. It was the hegemony's only answer to any problem: overwhelming, brutal force. He felt a profound sense of exhaustion, the weariness of a man who had spent his life sifting through the ashes of dead civilizations and was now about to watch his own join them. But then, a new presence touched his mind. It was the Weaver, and its consciousness was no longer a chaotic ocean or a questioning child. It was a vast, calm lake, perfectly still, perfectly clear. "They desire the legacy of my creators," the Weaver conveyed to him. It was not a question seeking guidance, but a statement seeking confirmation. They believe power is a thing to be taken. They wish to inherit the home of the Wardens. "Yes," Kalen whispered, his hand finding Alara's. She gripped it tightly, her knuckles white, her eyes fixed on the armada. "That's what they believe." A feeling emanated from the Weaver, an emotion so ancient and profound it had no name in any language Kalen knew. It was the solemnity of a promise being fulfilled, the quiet grief of a child putting their parents' affairs in order. "Then they shall have it." The hegemony fleet began its advance, a slow, inexorable tide of metal and fire. Admiral Thrax was giving them no more time. The countdown to annihilation had begun, but the bioarc, the last library, began to respond. It wasn't a defensive maneuver. The crack in its crystalline shell, which had been slowly healing, now spread. Branching out across its entire surface, in a fractal of brilliant white light. Then, with a silence that was more profound than any sound, the entire structure bloomed. The crystalline shell peeled back like the petals of a colossal flower, revealing the ancient, petrified tree at its core. And from that core, from the heart of what was once human civilization, a wave of pure, silent consciousness expanded into the void. It was the Wardens, all of them. The billion souls who had sacrificed themselves to build this cage were now released from their vigil. But they were not an army of vengeful ghosts. They were a presence, a memory, a single, unified truth. The wave of their collective being washed over the hegemony fleet, and it did not burn or break or destroy. It shared. On the bridge of the hegemony flagship, Grand Admiral Thrax felt his rigid, disciplined mind shatter into a billion pieces. He was no longer Thrax. He was a scientist named Lena, watching in horror as the creature of pure creation, their beautiful weaver, nearly unraveled a galaxy out of grief. He was a philosopher named Marcus, arguing passionately for the chosen silence, the terrible, necessary sacrifice. He was a soldier, a poet, a farmer, a child. He felt the collective pride of a species that had touched the stars, the hubris of creating a god, and the bottomless, eternal regret of realizing their mistake. He was forced to experience, in a single, crushing instant, the full weight of the human journey, the genius, the sin, and the 40,000-year penance. Across the fleet, it was the same. Every soldier, every pilot, every officer was submerged in the Warden's legacy. They were given the inheritance they so craved, not the power, but the wisdom, the terrible, soul-crushing wisdom that comes from making a mistake of galactic consequence. They were made to understand, not with their minds, but with the very fabric of their beings, that some power is too great to be wielded, and that the ultimate act of dominance is to lay your weapons down. The lights on the hegemony warships flickered and died. Their engines went cold. Their advance halted. The 30 warships simply floated, silent and dark. Their crews no longer soldiers, but monks in a sudden, involuntary monastery of the soul. Their ambition, the driving engine of the entire hegemony, had been extinguished by a truth too profound to bear. The Weaver shielded the Somnus from the wave, allowing Kaelin and Ilara to be the sole witnesses to the silent, devastating enlightenment. Kaelin watched, his breath caught in his throat, as the greatest military force in the sector was disarmed not by a weapon, but by a story. With the hegemony neutralized, the Warden's presence softened, their purpose fulfilled, their unified consciousness, now free, did not linger. It unraveled, a billion points of light fading back into the cosmos, their long watch finally over. They dissolved into a final, perfect silence, leaving behind only the echo of their sacrifice. The Weaver, now alone and untethered, turned its vast attention inward. The veil of whispers, the nebula it had erased in its initial awakening, was still a void. Kaelin felt the Weaver's intention, a final act of creation born from all the lessons it had learned. A gentle pulse of light emanated from the great tree, and the silence began to fill with substance. The psychic echoes of the dead races began to reappear, but they were no longer the chaotic, screaming ghosts of the static. The Weaver was reweaving them, not as prisons of their final, agonizing moments, but as peaceful, ordered memories. The terror of the Cathar became a silent, beautiful tapestry of a sun's life cycle. The sorrow of the Gesh became a serene, interconnected latticework of communal thought. It was transforming the graveyard into a library, a true archive, perfect and complete. The phantom heartbeat that had drawn them here finally faded, replaced by a gentle, cosmic hum of peace. The Weaver's work was done. The story must be remembered. It said, its last thought touching Kalen's mind. It was a farewell. But I am not the one to tell it. That is the work of a listener. Kalen felt the last vestiges of the Weaver's immense presence recede, not flying away, but becoming part of the very fabric of the sector. It wasn't gone. It had become the silence itself, a watchful, benevolent law of nature, a quiet reminder of the cost of wisdom. Kalen and Alara stood on the bridge of the Somnus, floating in a silent nebula that was no longer a place of ghosts, but a memorial made of starlight. Before them drifted the inert hegemony fleet, a silent testament to the power of an idea. There was no wreckage, no bodies, no evidence of a battle. There was only peace, absolute and unnerving. What now? Alara whispered, her voice trembling with the sheer scale of what they had witnessed. Kalen looked out at the transformed nebula, the new archive, and felt the weight of his old life, the life of a professional mourner, fall away. The dead were at peace, but the living needed to be warned. They needed to be told the story of the species that grew so powerful they chose to disappear for the sake of the stars. Now, he said, his voice steady and clear, filled with a purpose he had never known before. We go back, and we tell them the truth. He turned the Somnus around, leaving the silent fleet and the living library behind. He had dived into the echoes of endings his entire life, always listening, never speaking, but the last child of humanity had given him a new voice. He was no longer just a listener. He was a witness. And, for the first time, in a galaxy haunted by the ghosts of its past, he had a story to tell that might just save its future.